So how does a people known as desert warriors, people with literally zero naval experience, go up against a 700-year-old maritime superpower? You know, an empire that basically owned an entire sea. It sounds completely impossible, right? But it's a real story, and it's a powerful one, about vision, strategy, and a whole lot of faith. This is the story of that impossible journey, from desert sands to ocean thrones.
And it all starts, not with some grand military strategy, but with the dream. The Prophet Muhammad saw a vision of his followers sailing into battle, but he didn't just see them as sailors, he described them as kings sitting on thrones. When his relative, Haram, heard about this, she asked, "Will I be with them?" And he promised her she would. This prophecy, right here, planted a seed, a divine call to go and master a world that was completely alien to them.
And I mean, what an alien world it was. On one side, you've got the Rashidun Caliphate. These guys were the undisputed masters of land warfare. I mean, an unstoppable force that had already expanded across continents. And on the other, the Byzantine Empire, the heirs of Rome. Their navy had dominated the Mediterranean for 700 years. The sea was so completely theirs, people just called it the Roman Sea. The challenge? You know, it just couldn't have been bigger.
Okay, so you have this incredible prophecy. How do you even begin to make that a reality? This wasn't just about hammering some wood together to build ships. It was about fighting through some really deep-seated skepticism and just some massive logistical problems.
Well, the governor of Syria at the time, a man named Muawiyah, he saw the constant threat from Byzantine ships raiding the coast. He pleaded with Caliph Umar to let him build a fleet. But Umar said no. The risk was just too high. These were desert fighters, not sailors. But Muawiyah didn't give up. After Umar passed, he went to the new caliph, Uthman, and kept asking, kept pushing. Uthman hesitated too, but Muawiyah's logic was relentless, and he finally won him over, but with one very strange condition attached.
And you can just feel his persistence in a letter he wrote to the caliph. He argued that the Byzantine island of Cyprus was so close, the threat was so real that, quote, "we can hear the dogs barking from there." I mean, what a powerful way to say the danger is literally on your doorstep and you just can't ignore it anymore.
So Caliph Uthman finally gives in, and here's that strange condition. He told Muawiyah that if sea travel was really so safe, then he and his top commanders had to take their wives with them on the very first campaign. And you know what? Muawiyah accepted. So they kicked off this incredible strategic evolution. They took over abandoned Byzantine shipyards, and in a brilliant, pragmatic move, they hired the very Christian engineers who, not long before, were building ships for their enemies. And then, of course, came the hardest part, teaching desert warriors how to become sailors.
And what were they building? Well, they reverse-engineered the enemy's best technology, the dromon. Now, we're not talking about little boats here. These things were massive warships that could carry up to 300 soldiers. To even have a chance, they had to build a fleet that could go toe-to-toe with the most advanced ships in the world.
So, with a brand new fleet and some newly trained sailors, it was time for a test run. And the target? The very island Muawiyah had been complaining about, Cyprus. But this mission, it was about a lot more than just strategy. It was about faith. So, in 649 AD, the fleet set sail, and the whole campaign was just a stunning success. The defenders on Cyprus were completely caught by surprise and surrendered pretty quickly. This was the proof of concept they needed. But here's where the story gets really incredible. Remember that strange condition about the wives? Well, among them on that very first voyage was Haram. Just like the Prophet had predicted all those decades ago, there she was, part of that first naval force. She tragically died on the island in an accident, fulfilling that prophecy down to the last detail.
Now, you can imagine that the victory in Cyprus sent a massive shockwave through the Byzantine Empire. The emperor himself, Constans II, he could not let this challenge go unanswered. He decided he would personally lead a huge fleet to crush this upstart Muslim navy once and for all. And this, right here, set the stage for one of the greatest naval battles in history.
And just look at the force the emperor brought with him, an enormous armada of 500 warships. This was the full might of the Byzantine navy, led by the ruler of the empire himself. It was meant to be a terrifying, overwhelming show of force.
And what did the Muslim fleet have to meet them? Just 200 ships. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. They were way less experienced, and they were facing the undisputed masters of the sea. The odds, they were just staggering.
And somehow it gets even worse. As the two fleets lined up to face each other, the wind was blowing against the Muslim ships. That pushed them back and gave the Byzantines a huge advantage in speed and maneuverability. So with the wind itself fighting against them, how in the world could they possibly win?
This is where the Muslim commander Abdallah ibn Sa'd had an absolute stroke of genius. He knew they couldn't win a traditional sea battle. So he decided to completely change the rules of the game.
First, they just dropped anchor and waited, and in a crucial twist, the wind actually shifted. Then came the masterstroke. They tied all of their ships to each other, creating this one massive, stable, floating platform. From this platform, they could throw grappling hooks, pull the Byzantine ships in close, and do what they did best, fight hand-to-hand. This just brilliantly shows their strategic evolution. If you can't win a sea battle, you turn it into a land battle on the water.
The fight that followed was just brutal and chaotic. All swords and arrows on the decks of ships in the middle of a raging storm. But when the waves finally settled, the result was world-altering.
Just let that sink in for a moment. In one single afternoon, 7 centuries of unchallenged dominance over the Roman Sea came to a sudden, violent end. The Byzantine emperor himself barely got away with his life, disguised as a common soldier just to escape. The seas were now open.
You know, a victory this huge changes everything. It's not just about winning a battle. It unlocks possibilities that were completely unimaginable just a few years before. So what do you do when you suddenly become a dominant naval power? What's the next move?
Well, Caliph Uthman had a plan, and it was breathtakingly ambitious. The idea was to use this new naval power to launch a multi-front invasion of Europe. The plan was to conquer Spain, then march through France and Italy, take Greece, and finally attack the Byzantine capital of Constantinople from the European side by land. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a staggering vision to totally reshape the known world.
The ships were ready, the plan was in motion. A completely different timeline for world history seemed like it was about to begin. But that grand chapter, it was never written. Shortly after this victory, Caliph Uthman was assassinated, and the caliphate plunged into civil war. And it just begs the question, doesn't it? What would our world even look like today if that plan had actually been set in motion?